Hello and welcome to the Unnamed Automotive Podcast. My name is Sami Assad, and with me, as always, is my good friend and fellow automotive journalist, Benjamin Hunting. Say hi to the people, Ben.
Greetings, human listeners.
Greetings to everyone. If this is the first time you're listening to our podcast, thank you for trying something new. I will reiterate, Ben and I are a pair of automotive journalists, but more important than that, we're very good friends. Right, Ben?
Sami, how many truly new experiences do you think are left in the world?
Plenty. Why?
Is listening to our podcast the only one left? Would you say that's
for
an
some
accurate
people,
statement?
for sure.
Yeah, I think there are some people out there, grizzled people, who are weary of the world, and then they stumble across our podcast and they're like, well, now I've done that.
Now I've done that. You know what we're going to do next? We're going to ask Ben to share his latest publications that he's recently written for. Okay, Ben, you're up. Here we go.
Sure, you can find my writing at Capital One Auto Navigator, at Motor Trend, and at Haggerty.
And you can find my work at autotrader.ca and driving.ca, as well as Capital One's Auto Navigator. Ben, I've heard that you have a very interesting luxury crossover that I don't know the first thing about. I need you to tell me everything about what you've been driving lately.
So you'll remember that back in the late 2000s, car companies became obsessed with coupes that weren't really coupes. And what I mean by that is they took a different interpretation of what the word coupe meant. And for most of us, coupe means two doors. I mean, that's how I was raised. Maybe you were raised differently.
No, I agree.
Car companies were like, no. You don't understand the history of everything. And coupes really just refer to a roofline that slopes gently or more abruptly at the back. And the number of doors is unimportant. And so this philosophy gave us the CLS from Mercedes, which I think was the first real application of the coupe concept with four doors. But
the four-door coupe, yes.
More importantly, Sami, it quickly migrated to SUVs. And we got the X6, which was the first real SUV coupe, and it was quickly followed by the Acura ZDX. And these were essentially, for Acura, I mean, I don't really think the ZDX was an MDX with a different roofline, but the X6 was pretty much an X5 with a different roofline. Like, it was impractical at the back, like very truncated in the cargo area, but it was positioned as something that was sportier. And this marketing affectation for the next 15 years became a thing, and lots of car companies made crossover coupes. So all of this to say, Genesis has been around for, I don't know, 8 years now, Sami? 6, 8, 7, 8 years, something like that.
Okay, I think it's a little bit longer, but yeah, sure.
And they first appeared on the scene with sedans because I'm not sure why, but they made the bold step of building a full-size luxury sedan and then an entry-level 3 Series competitor instead of taking on, the very popular sport utility vehicles from BMW, Audi, and all that. By now they've caught up in terms of sport utility vehicles. They've kind of even surpassed some of their rivals with electrification, but until 2025 model year, they had not gotten into the crossover coupe game. Sami, right. I'm here to tell you that all of that has changed because the Genesis GV80 Coupe is now a real thing that is real, and I've driven it.
The GV80 Coupe. Now, this to me sounds a lot like the BMW approach, which is take the X5, which is a full-size SUV.
Very useful. Had 3 rows for quite a long time. Not sure if it still does.
I think there's an option. Okay. And then chop the top corner of it and call it a coupe, right? Or call it an X6.
Exactly. It's like, you know how when you're reading a book and you fold the corner of the page to remember where you are? That's what they do with the SUV.
That's a whole new book.
Exactly. They fold the corner and instead of remembering what the SUV was, you forget and it's something else. So your description is very accurate. The GV80 Coupe is just I'm not going to say just, it is a GV80 SUV where they've sloped the rear roof. And when I say sloped, it's not all that extreme. Okay. There's actually there's also one other aspect of the vehicle exterior wise that is different. It's about an inch longer than the regular GV80, even though they have the same wheelbase.
And no more third row, right?
No. Well, I'm going to get to the interior.
Oh, sorry.
But still talking about the exterior, you have like that rake at the back. It drops the height of the roofline overall by 0.2 inches. So again, not super extreme. But it
by
does
2 inches or 0.2 of an inch?
0.2 inches.
0.2 of an inch.
And that 0.2 inches is it's attenuated by the fact that you have the longer rear. And part of that, I believe, is there's like a molded kind of wing that sticks up from the hatch, but it's molded out of the hatch, but also into the rear fenders, kind of giving it a buff look. It's the same width as the GV80. Like, they didn't give it muscular haunches or anything, but the shape is intended to suggest that this is a sportier version of the vehicle. There's another thing about the GV80 Coupe that pushes into the quote unquote sportier side of the utility, and that's the engine. You can in the GV80.
Well, in the past, the GV80 used to come with 2 powertrain choices: a turbocharged 4 and a turbocharged 6, right?
Yeah, but the GV80 Coupe only comes with one. It's the 3.5 liter twin turbo V6, and the version of the vehicle that I drove, I'm not sure if this is all of them. No, sorry. There are still 2 versions, 2 drivetrains you can get with the coupe, but they're both based on that twin turbo V6. There's the normal one, which is 375 horsepower. The version that I drove has something called E-SC. I'm going to let you guess. What do you think? What does that stand for?
Electronic stability control.
No, you're close. You got one of the words right.
Emergency stability control.
Emergency squid control?
Yes.
No, you're way off now.
Okay. Hit me. I don't know. Come on. Don't
Electronic
make me guess.
Supercharger.
Oh.
Like
hold on. Is it a twin charged powertrain, or it has or is turbos are basically pre-spun electronics?
Yeah, it's a preload for the turbos. But in addition to reduce sorry?
That's very neat. I don't know if that's totally necessary, but that's neat.
Well, in addition to reducing turbo lag, it actually gives the vehicle 30 more horsepower, pretty much. It goes from 375 to 409 horses and 405 pound-feet of torque. I can't tell you whether I felt any of that extra power. The car, under full acceleration, it's relatively quick. It's not super responsive to the gas pedal. It didn't, like, I didn't necessarily feel like it had sharp throttle response, but it's fast enough. I mean, the GV80 has always had a sweet engine, and the coupe is no different. It's also very quiet, which is something that's interesting in the luxury space, especially when you're talking about performance. Normally, they try to give you like a louder exhaust note to make you feel like you're, I guess, driving an actual sports car. But Genesis has strayed away from that, and I probably appreciate it more than I would some kind of fake, either a sweetened sound inside the cabin or some kind of fuel dump in the exhaust that's going to make it go burp, burp, burp. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's always this, I've had this conversation with you before in the past that sportiness and power are not necessarily the same concept, but I get that in order to give the idea of a vehicle being more exciting, you give it more power, and that's the easiest job to do, I think, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly more excitement. I think it's also partly to justify the price differences for the vehicle.
Is there a big price difference compared to a GV80 with the 6?
That I can't tell you. I'm assuming that it is more expensive. This starts at 87 grand, and in the US, and my version that I drove in Canada was 104,000 Canadian. That's
104.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, at that point, what are we looking at in terms of competitors? Like a Cayenne S?
Yeah, it has to be.
Or at X5 M60, like that kind of thing?
Wow. That's a tough crowd.
It is, because it's not as fast as either of those vehicles.
And those vehicles carry a lot of brand recognition, a lot of like history, I guess, with those like, I don't want to call them high performance, but those more powerful crossovers, right?
Yeah, and there's a Cayenne S Coupe as well, right? Like,
yeah,
there's no X6 anymore.
What?
Is there still an X6?
Yeah, for sure.
I thought we were in between model years.
Oh,
I'm not sure.
Good question. I definitely thought there was an X6.
I could be completely wrong.
That's okay if you are, and if I am.
I haven't driven one in quite a while.
I'm going to check the model year on these.
Okay, I'm going to look up the pricing.
It looks like it.
Okay, so forget what I said. There's still an X6. But, the X6 is, I think, the touchstone that Genesis is looking at for the GV80 Coupe because it does have that sportiness in terms of look and the extra power in the way that the X6 was meant to suggest it was a sportier version of the X5. I think where it falls down is I'm not a big X6 fan.
Neither am I. I prefer the X5 in a lot of ways.
I've driven the X6 on a racetrack, and sure, it's competent, but I would never call it fun. I'm looking at going back to the GV80 pricing. The base version of the GV80 with the twin turbo V6 is $74,000, and they also make a prestige trim, which is $79,000. So both of those numbers that puts it's between $10,000 and $13,000 more than the regular GV80.
That's 10 and 13.
Yeah, so that you are definitely paying more for quote unquote less, right? The other aspect of this vehicle where I think it falls away from the BMW model is it is not engaging to drive. And when I say that, I don't want to make it seem like I dislike driving this vehicle. I think it is as good to drive as the GV80. And I think the GV80 is one of my favorite luxury SUVs that's out there. I think it looks great on the outside. The attention to detail in the interior is excellent. I think it has more than enough power to get out of its own way, to be reasonably, it's 5.2 seconds to 60, something like that in the coupe and the SUV. That's plenty.
That's still
fast.
Quick, yeah.
There's
no reason to be upset about that.
Yeah, exactly. But from a suspension,
that just shows how fast all these SUVs have gotten too, right?
Of course. I mean, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. And I was on winter tires, so when I talk about the handling not being all that engaging, that's going to be part of the factor. But in general, the GV80 Coupe felt like it just wanted to float along and look stylish and be comfortable and didn't really want you to hustle it. And that's totally cool because I don't really want to hustle it either. I mean, this is a vehicle that weighs 5,000 pounds. It's not going to give you any kind of, athleticism in your daily drive or on a twisty road or wherever you happen to be driving it. It's just going to be ruthlessly competent at almost everything except a slalom. And I personally don't have a problem with that.
Cool. Okay. But that pricing, and what about the interior? Actually, you didn't mention too much about the cabin of this.
So it does lose the third row, like you said. So again, that's kind of the paying more for less. You're getting a little bit more power with the supercharger version of the vehicle, the electronic supercharger, but you are losing that practicality if you wanted the option of the third row. I hauled a set of tires into Montreal with the car. I was able to fit them inside the coupe without any problems with the rear seat down. With the seat up, it's tight. Like you can't really stack a lot of things, especially if you keep the cargo cover in place. I almost always take the cargo cover out because I'm worried I'm going to bash into it with something if I'm hauling large equipment or gear or whatever. So I had that out of the way and I had the 4 tires in, and there was plenty of room for other stuff I could have put on the tires, but it is less practical than the standard GV80. Okay.
But is the interior design still as sort of
virtually identical? It's great.
So that's an important thing to talk about because I think the GV80, we first saw it about 3 or 4 years ago, I think. And I think it impressed then, but I think everyone else in the luxury space has also improved their interiors.
But I mean, it's just like I mentioned, the detail that Genesis puts into things is usually higher than what you're going to get from the competition until you start paying considerably more money.
Yeah, until you get into like AMGs, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Mercedes interiors, but yeah, I see what you're saying. I do have one complaint.
Something of that tier. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
I do have one complaint about the Genesis interior, and I talked about this on the show last week. Where I had been driving the G80 Electrified, and the G80 Electrified is still the previous generation G80 for the most part, from what I understand, which means it actually had a gauge cluster and a binnacle, and then separate from that was a infotainment screen that was on the dashboard. Whereas in the GV80 Coupe, it is one single screen that's divided into many sections. There's no binnacle. So what you end up with is you have a dashboard, and then someone took an iPad and plopped it on the dashboard in front of you. And that's it in terms of design. So all the detail that's in other parts of the car is completely absent from the way it presents information to the driver. I think that's a huge mistake for a
Yeah,
company
I
like
understand,
Genesis.
for sure.
I'm not saying that the system was difficult to use or that the graphics didn't look good or that I wasn't able to do everything I needed to do in terms of vehicle features and infotainment and all that stuff. I just think it's ugly. It's an inelegant way of presenting the information, and at the same time, you're giving up any type of individuality. Every single screen looks the same when it's off, and every single screen looks the same to the passenger from the other side of the car.
Sure, yeah.
Whereas if you have a design, a way to present information that is incorporating a design element like a binnacle, which you can create anything you want out of that. You know, like say what you will about I have lots of complaints about Mini's infotainment system being in the middle and having the cheap pop-up screen. We talked about
but
that.
But it's different. Like
it's its own thing.
Yeah,
exactly. That circular screen is its own thing. They've gone out of their way to make their one screen something that isn't what everybody else has. Whether you like it or not, they put some design effort into that. With Genesis, there's plenty of design effort in the door panels, on the seats, which are nicely quilted, on every surface that you touch, and on the graphics that you're looking at on the screen. But the screen itself is an afterthought. You know, I look at that screen and I'm like, am I in an Ioniq 5?
Wow, okay.
Or am I in the Ford Mustang GT that I drove a couple months ago that had exactly the same setup, just a screen plopped down on the dashboard? I feel like we're going to look back on this era and it's going to be like, you know, you can look at eras of automotive design where every car company was doing the same thing. Yeah. And as a result of that, there was no individuality. I think about like velour inside the interior where everyone had that on the seats, or everyone had a vinyl roof, or portholes on luxury cars in the roofs. Right. You know, all of these things, they date your car because they didn't serve any real purpose. They were styling affectations. And because everyone did it, there's no individuality. There's no way for a car company to latch onto that design element and say, this is something that we did particularly well. I think we're going to look at screens and we're going to be like, everyone just put, you know, essentially black plastic on the dash and hope for the best.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thing, but because some automakers are taking steps to make their digital gauge cluster a bit different. I mean, we talked about the Mustang having different settings for like a Fox body inspired screen, and then I think there's a new Edge.
But that's all on the graphics side. That's aside from what I'm talking about. I don't have an issue with that. My issue is with
just the cheap way and an easy way of making it look different. But you're right, when it's all off, and you want someone to. I think the automaker themselves should be thinking about someone looking at a car while it's off, when it's in a parking lot, or when somebody jumps into a friend jumps into a car for a first time, and they want that wow factor, even when the car is off, right?
And it's like, do I want people to look at that rectangular piece of plastic and think, oh, I'm just looking at another screen? I'm just looking at another tablet, another phone, another TV? Or do you want to present the information in a way that is unique to your car, that makes people think I'm looking at a Genesis?
But then you've said this about, like, I mean, there are unique screens in the industry. I mean, there's curved screens. There's that massive hyper screen.
Okay, the hyper screen is unique, but a curved screen is not unique. It's just a curved screen. You know, unless that screen is curved and incorporated into a design element, I don't think it's unique. I don't like the hyper screen, but Mercedes has done it in a way that no one else has done it. So you can, it's ugly when it's off. It's just as ugly, but in a different way. Yeah.
It's just, I don't know. It's a number of different ways to look at this automotive design. I think you're right. I think this is an era of interior that we're going to see, and look back on and be like, why did they all go this way? I think we know why. I think I think there's an affordability aspect to it.
Sure, it's way cheaper to do this. I mean, it's something you don't have to design. But I shouldn't have a $100,000 luxury car that looks like, and this isn't just specific to Genesis, but it shouldn't look like I went down to Best Buy and had them put something on the dash, or that I could go to Best Buy and upgrade to a larger screen, which I think is like a weird concept, but that's where I'm going when it looks like my car is filled with consumer electronics. It's like back in the days when people had those extreme stereo installations and the stereos were just like, you ended up with a stereo that didn't match your interior at all. It was just,
Yeah.
here's a Kenwood setup, and here's an Eclipse setup. And you had this super branding on like your subwoofers and on your screens and everything like that. And it just took you out of the overall OEM experience. And I kind of feel like when I look at these generic screens, it takes me out of what a Genesis is, what a BMW is, what a Mustang is. Maybe I'm crazy.
Fair, yeah.
Maybe I'm the only one who feels this way.
I think you're definitely onto something. I don't think there's anything controversial about what you're saying. I just think that we're caught in this world where the automakers believe that this is the cheapest and easiest ways to do what they're trying to do, which is present information to the driver and their passengers, and make it look high tech, which used to be synonymous with high end, which I don't think is no longer the case, right?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So, your overall impressions though of the GV80 Coupe?
I think if you like the way it looks, there's no reason not to buy it. I think if you like the way it looks, but you want it to be more practical, the GV80 is obviously the non-coupe is the better choice. I think the non-coupe is the better choice across the board for everyone who isn't in love with the styling. Because you are going to be giving up practicality because of that styling. So that's the only choice here. It's not as extreme as the X5, X6 comparison. I feel like the X6 took some... I think the design of the X6 is much more extroverted than what Genesis has done with the GV80 Coupe. So the distinction is the line is a little bit blurrier. I personally would take the standard GV80. That's just an aesthetic thing. But I also think that you should go into this not expecting it to feel like a high performance vehicle, just expecting it to feel like a good luxury SUV. I don't think it has any edge over the GV80, the standard version in that category either.
Is this powertrain, has that come to the regular GV80?
That I don't know. I tried to look it up. I'm looking at the build thing now, and let me tell you, because
no indication. Okay.
It doesn't really show it. You can select, I'm selecting the Prestige 3.5, but I don't know if it's available with the ESC option.
400 horsepower is pretty nice.
Yeah, but is 409 horsepower any better than 375 horsepower?
Yeah.
Is it?
It's 30 more horsepower.
But what percentage is that? 7% more? I think it's 7%.
Yeah, just under 10.
Okay, so I ask again.
10% is 10%, man, or 7% is 7%.
Okay, all right.
That's interesting, but I think any bit is better than any more is better than none.
So
is that it? That's all you want to talk about?
That's it. That's all I want to talk about. You also have to ask yourself whether you're worth what you want to pay, $13,000 for that 7%.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Well, that's about 10%.
I mean, we are in the world of diminishing returns once you start to get to these price points, but
I want to talk to you about price points because we talk about how expensive vehicles are, and even family-friendly cars or mainstream vehicles can be considered a bit pricey as well. I got my hands on a top trim version of the Honda Pilot. I know we've talked about the Honda Pilot a lot in the past, mostly the Trail Sport trim, which costs about $50,000. And the model I drove was the Black Edition, which is close to $56,000. And I found this thing to be very expensive and with little reasoning why. It's got like leather seats. It's got an infotainment system with built-in navigation and heated seats, heated steering wheel, vented seats, and a head-up display. Well, I don't know if that's enough nowadays, right? I don't know if that's enough to call a car the top trim level of a vehicle. In fact, I would always say maybe the Pilot, in terms of the Pilot lineup, you get more or less the same car throughout in the entry-level model and in the top trim level. It has the same powertrain, it has the same interior, the same amount of space.
So you're saying there's no electric supercharger?
There is no E-SC. So one of the things I thought about when driving this Pilot, a car that I found was a little expensive at $56,000, was that there are cheaper 3-rows on the market that give up very little. And in particular, I'm talking about the Hyundai Santa Fe. The new Hyundai Santa Fe is wild looking. I mean, we've talked about it in the past.
Yeah, I drove it I think, in July.
It is this bossy, very practical looking vehicle, and that appearance translates to the cabin. I really love how upright the trunk is on this thing. So that means when you close the trunk, the hatch, that's where the cargo floor or the cargo load is finished, right? Sometimes you have like a sloped hatch, so it'll catch on something and then you can't close the hatch anymore. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yes. In this case, it's very vertical, so it's super easy to load, full of stuff. I loved that about it. It felt like you could take advantage of it altogether. But what's more interesting about the Santa Fe is that it starts at $35,000 and tops out closer to $48,000. So around where this Pilot kind of starts, which is 41, you're not far off of the top trim level of the Hyundai Santa Fe. And I'm going to argue,
but I want to ask you, is that the regular Santa Fe or is that the hybrid Santa Fe pricing?
Even more interesting is the hybrid. Yes, the hybrid starts at 38,000 and tops out at 48 as well. In Canada, the trim levels of the Hyundai Santa Fe are all mixed up. In that sense, I want to explain to you that in Canada, if you get a Hyundai Santa Fe and you get the base model, you are getting the hybrid version of the car.
Okay.
Every other version of the car is not a hybrid.
Wait, so you're saying you can only buy a base model hybrid?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, which is both interesting and both interesting because that means you get the hybrid version of the car at let me get the Canadian pricing, $45,000. And then the fully loaded ones are, I mean, the turbocharged 4 cylinders that are found in the XRT, Luxury, and Ultimate calligraphy models are much more powerful with 270 horsepower compared to 230 in the hybrid, but also way less fuel efficient, of course. I drove the hybrid, yes.
I want to add one thing. So Hyundai is weird about its trim levels in Canada,
yeah,
because you can add packages that essentially make it a new trim level.
Okay.
So if you have the base Hyundai Santa, because I'm just interjecting this because I drove this vehicle in the summer and I reviewed it for an American client, and there's something called
important.
There's something called
the trend package.
The trend package. So if you add the trend package, it brings it more in line with like what a mid-tier trim would be.
And that's what I had as well, which is an extra $4,000 Canadian dollars.
That's not nothing. You know, that's
not nothing.
10%, as we say.
It's still cheaper than a Pilot.
Yes.
And thoroughly, in every single way in the cabin, this Santa Fe with this base level Santa Fe with this trend package has more features and is more interesting and exciting to drive than this Pilot. And I think that's a really important thing to bring up. The Hyundai has a bigger, I know we just had a whole thing about infotainment screens and digital gauge clusters, but when they're this big and they're this customizable and they're this feature filled, it's a good thing, because what you get in the Pilot is not very big. It honestly, when I got into it, I was like, I need glasses or something, because this infotainment system is very small. And it has all these great features: a wireless phone charger, it has USB-C ports, it has a digital key that you can sync up to your phone. I've got these 20-inch wheels, a dual pane sunroof. I also have heated steering wheel and heated seats, automatic climate control in the rear as well. So in every way, I'm finding this to be a totally functional family vehicle.
Can we do a sidebar for a second on wireless charging?
Yes.
So,
yeah, I think this is a great idea to talk about.
I finally have a phone that allows for wireless charging. I've been buying OnePlus phones for a while, and they don't normally include that feature, but the new one has it. And I've had really mixed results with how it works in cars. I've had some vehicles where it constantly connects and disconnects.
The wireless charging part, or the wireless infotainment system?
No, the wireless charging part. I don't want to talk about wireless infotainment. Okay. I just want to focus on charging. But it constantly disconnects and reconnects over the course of a drive, and because of that, my phone makes a little noise when you do that, and it's annoying. I've had to put the phone in silent mode. It's the only real way. That's on the phone side, but on the
sometimes it lights up the screen and then will start draining your battery rather than charging.
Or it lights up the screen all the time. I've also had instances where it, depending on how the phone is positioned inside the tray, whether it will actually connect or not. I've also had instances where it gets the phone really, really hot. And I have my phone set to stop charging at 80%. And I think that messes with the wireless charging system a little bit.
Maybe.
It doesn't know what's going on. And it's like, well, there's still battery available. I still want to charge. And the phone's like, no, we don't want your charge, bro.
Yeah.
And then they kind of fight it out. And I don't know if that overheats my phone circuits or, I even set my phone has the option to charge at a lower speed wirelessly. It's supposed to be for noise, which I assume, I guess there's some wireless chargers that have a fan that come on if they're charging very quickly. I don't think that's a thing in cars, but I set it to the low setting to see if it made a difference. And bottom line is there's sometimes I'll drive for an hour and my phone doesn't charge or it barely charges. And sometimes I'll drive for like 10, 15 minutes and it charges very well. And this is the experience I'm having with various vehicles. So it hasn't been consistent for me, Sami. I haven't found that wireless charging works nearly as well as just plugging into a USB. Has that been your experience?
No, I think USB is way more reliable and works more often than not. Now, I have had wireless phone charging in a couple of phones. I remember I think I have a Google Pixel 3 that used to have similar issues you did in terms of like overheating and not feeling very effective. It always seemed like, especially because you would match wireless phone charging with wireless infotainment, like smartphone production.
I also find that,
and then it seems like those two just cancel each other out, and you end up having the same battery charge when you leave the car.
Or I would have the wireless infotainment being affected by the heat that's generated by the phone, or just in general interfering with the wireless transmission. I get the feeling that there's not really a good standard being used in cars.
In my recent experience, though, I have a Pixel 6 now, which is older than your device, but I keep it in a case as well, and I don't have any issues now with wireless phone charging. I think your case has a lot to do with, not your personal case, but I think in general the case has a lot to do with how it impacts.
It might. I mean, I've tried with and without the case. I've also
and you also have the same issues.
Well, I ordered this case specifically because it's essentially the rear of my case is transparent plastic, so it's not like a big rugged case, and it's known to be okay for wireless charging. I do have a large camera cluster on the phone, humble brag. So I'm wondering if the fact that it can't lie flat has something to do with it. But either way, it just hasn't been a seamless experience. And more often than not, I'm just going back to, I'm going to talk next week about the vehicle I'm driving currently, which I have enormous problems with its wireless infotainment system. And so have pretty much everyone else who's owned this car. So I'm pretty sure it's not related to my phone, but which has kept me from using its wireless charging, which wasn't working very well either. But in the Genesis, the wireless charging was generally okay, except for the interruptions that I mentioned. And for the most part, the wireless infotainment worked well. If I drove for like an hour or two, it would cut out for like maybe 1 or 2 seconds. And when I say cut out, it would either skip or it would just kind of distort for a second, which is something I don't experience with a wired connection.
Okay, yeah, I think that's fair.
Like,
I just think
does
it's
that
more
happen
reliable,
to you? Do you ever have like it just like glitches for like a little bit and then keeps?
No,
working?
I'm fairly confident in my wireless phone charging.
I mean, like when you're streaming audio specifically.
Yeah, I don't have that. I mean, I think different cars have different systems. Like they work a little bit differently. I think there's been a few vehicles that I'm like, I'm not even going to bother because if it doesn't work in the first like drive home after picking up a car, I'm like, I don't think this will work the rest of the week. And I'll just rely on USB-C or something like that. I've had to change a lot of cables. I found that a lot of cables don't like being left in cars, especially outside outside in the heat or the cold temperatures that we get, and they like degrade and suddenly just stop working after
And also the fact that you often have to twist your phone into some weird position in order to put it in the console, and that twists the cable, and then the cable sits in that position for like the entire week, and then you multiply that week by 52, and
and now I'm finding that I've had more luck with like those braided cables that are a bit like sturdier. They seem to last a little bit longer so far. I think I haven't changed a cable in about a year, so I'm pretty happy with that.
All right, so thank you for indulging me on my detour. Let's get back to your Santa Fe.
Anyways, but the point is that there are attractive 3-row crossovers that you don't have to spend pilot money on, and the Santa Fe is one of them.
It's weird to me that pilot money is now like an expression.
I mean, it is come on now, $40,000 for this thing.
No, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying it's weird that we're there. You know,
40 to 56,000 is a big spread.
That's Odyssey money.
Compared to, let's talk about the hybrid that I drove, which is 38 to 48,000 in the Santa Fe. This hybrid says that it only has it has about 40 less horsepower than the Pilot. I didn't feel it. It felt really confident on the road, and the fuel economy was really strong. I really don't know how to tell people that this is a really good, well-rounded, family-friendly vehicle. I was really impressed. I just can't find too much fault with this, with the exception of the third row is not super comfortable. Neither is, I mean, it's less comfortable than it is in the Pilot. And I would say that the third row is barely functional for anyone but children. And when the third row is up, the cargo space is really poor. Those are my major complaints with this vehicle.
That's true of almost every 3-row.
And I think that's important to point out. Yeah, that's true of almost every 3-row.
Unless you're getting like a large pickup truck based suburban type vehicle.
Yeah.
And even then, like a Tahoe, it's still not great. Like you have to really go for the suburban with the extended wheelbase.
So that brings up a really important perspective, which is that the Santa Fe has always been considered a kind of tweener between a compact a compact crossover and a midsize. And the Pilot is like a midsize 3-row. Maybe that the Pilot is the tweener because it's the one that's the compromise between something like the Santa Fe and, as you mentioned, a truck-sized crossover with a full third row and cargo space. And that's the one that seems to have the most compromise. That's just my concept. That's just an idea that I think is worth exploring because cars, as we mentioned, are more expensive. And you don't have to spend a lot to get a lot.
I really like
and Hyundai has proven that.
I was into it. You're not going to get any argument from me.
And I think that it is proving itself to be one of these all-around family-friendly vehicles. I don't know if that's been a thing for a long period of time. I used to remember when there were a lot of easy picks in the segment.
Well, it's because there were fewer, right? Like,
yeah, and I think the Pilot used to be among them, but now it's just so expensive and with little rationale for that price.
But think back to a world where your choices were Pilot or suburban. You know, if that's the case, then it's pretty clear who's going to be buying what. Like unless you need to be towing, unless you need rugged 4-wheel drive, you probably didn't need the suburban and you'd be totally happy with the Pilot. But now that the Pilot has been sliced into like a dozen sub genres and other automakers have rushed in to fill that niche, it's a lot harder to justify buying the Pilot because it's the Pilot.
The major issue with the segment here is something like the Highlander. The Highlander starts at $40,000, which is okay, and there's a hybrid version of it that's $46,000. I think that used to be another easy to recommend vehicle in the segment, and now it's not. And I'm saying, the Santa Fe just ends up undercutting everybody. It's a tiny bit smaller, but doesn't feel that much smaller. And I think it comes with such a good trade-off. Like everything else that you get with this car makes up for the fact that it has a little less cargo space compared to those other vehicles.
So how do you feel about it compared to, say, a Telluride or the larger Hyundai that's available? Like, do you think that this Hyundai? Do you think
the Palisade?
Do you think that the Santa Fe is challenging the Palisade now?
No. So this is where There's a couple of things about the Palisade that I think elevated above the Santa Fe, particularly in terms of interior design. Those details that are almost Genesis-like haven't trickled down into the Santa Fe yet. And I think that's what's saving the Palisade. And it has a functional third row along with cargo space. So it is able to withstand, stay in its own category. But I think that the Santa Fe is the actual winner of the crossover segment, the crossover portfolio in Hyundai's lineup. I think it's the best pick for a lot of people. I think if you're interested, I mean, I think especially in North America where bigger cars are popular, this thing is a better pick over a Tucson, even at the entry level trim. It's great, man. I don't know how else to say it. I've really been impressed with their performance here.
Anything else that you want to bring up in this battle royale between?
I never want to drive a Pilot again.
Wow.
I don't want to drive a Pilot until they finally do something unique with it, different with it.
You're saying that Black Editions and
Trail Sports
aren't unique enough for you?
Aren't doing it for me. No, absolutely not.
What if there was a Highlander off-road model, like a Highlander TRD? Do you think they would ever do that? Do you think now that we've crossed that barrier with the now that the RAV4 TRD exists, do you think there's any reason we couldn't have a Highlander TRD?
I mean, functionality-wise, I think is the main problem, is the main barrier. It needs to be... I mean, say what you will about the RAV4, when you put it in certain off-road conditions, it can succeed.
Okay.
Can a
I can't think of a
Highlander
statement with more qualifiers than what you just said.
I also kept it very vague, but I have done, the gravel and the sand in a RAV4, and it's good. I have a lot of confidence in the tires that they put on the TRD or the trail models, and I'm curious as to what the compromise will be if they wanted the same capability out of a Highlander. Yeah. But I mean, this is becoming way more commonplace to have a trail sport Pilot. There's these XRT versions of the Palisade and Santa Fe, and the X Pro versions of the Telluride and Sorento. There's all these pseudo off-road versions of all these cars. So where they just put all-terrain tires and a skid plate, and they're like, here we go. Are those really off-road versions? I mean, are they interesting? Do they get the job done?
That leaves the pavement is technically off-roading, right?
Yes.
So
I parked my FRS, my Scion in a gravel lot somewhere, I'm sure. So is it considered off-road?
And on that note,
yes,
if you would like to reach out to us, if any listeners would like to reach out to us and tell us what they think off-road is, or whether off-road is just this vast nebulous definition that could be applied to almost anything, how can they do that?
They can go over to our website, unnamedautomotivepodcast.com. There's a contact form there, and you fill that out, and it lands in our inbox, and then we probably talk about it, whatever your thoughts are about off-road. I think you're right, anywhere you leave the pavement, but if you have more qualifiers to add, which I'm very good at, send them our way. Additionally, you can email us the old-fashioned way. It's benjamin@benjaminhunting.com. Or you can reach out to us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, where Ben is @HuntingBenjamin, and I'm @Sami_ha, like you're laughing. Or you can find us on Blue Sky, where Ben is Hunting Benjamin, and I'm Sami-ha, like you're laughing.
That's confusing. That dash is...
There's no underscores or underlines or whatever they're called in Blue Sky. So I don't know
it's odd to me that you think that's the case. But, I mean, at this point, the die has been cast and you already have your account.
Yeah. What am I supposed to do?
I don't know. Nothing to do. What will we be talking about next week?
I'm not sure yet, actually.
Wow, that's exciting too.
What are you going to talk about?
I'm going to be talking about the Honda Civic Hybrid, which
yes,
you drove at the launch.
I drove a hybrid version of it, a hatchback version of it.
Yeah, I have the sedan. Not really a big difference, but I'm also
huge difference.
I'm also driving it in the winter, which is a pretty big difference, I think.
That is a big deal. Okay, cool. I can't wait to talk to you about that. I think this is a very important car, interesting car. I think it's going to generate a lot of conversation.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
See ya.